Also, let's talk about Nigeria's electricity transition market, which was started in November 2013, of course, with the privatization or the sale of those discos and gencos. Today, the Transmission Company of Nigeria, TCN, is holding, starting a two-day, what you call town hall meeting about the state of the industry in Lagos. The first one is about taking place right now as we speak in Ikeja. That's uptown here. The second will be on Thursday, the 20th. The TCN is looking to sitting down, I beg your pardon, the FCCPC is sitting down with, that's the Consumer Protection and Anti-Competition Agency, sitting down with electricity consumers, trying to find out solutions to some of the problems they have. Then TCN yesterday says the discos are owing about 230 billion naira as at the end of March 2019. So it looks a little bit very messy out there, how we get electricity to power, bring power to the people. But let's talk to one man who is in the industry, is the founding managing director of Nigeria Bulk Electricity Company, NBET. Rumundaka Wonodi is joining us from our Abuja studios this morning. Good morning. It's good to have you, sir.
Good morning, Bosin, and thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, and welcome to the program. Let's just hit the ground running. Looking at the state of the industry right now, what's your take, just in about a minute?
I think that the industry is in a very bad place. Let's just use a simple word for that. The major problems are with, first is the leadership. I think that the agencies that are in charge of the sector are not pulling together. So there is leadership misalignment amongst the various agencies. And then there is the issue of a physical constraint, the capacity throughput throughout the value chain, where you have generation outstripping transmission and transmission outstripping distribution. So we have a lot of stranded capacity. And then there are the issues of tariff. People might say the tariff is not cost reflective, which is true. At the same time, the tariff that we have actually offers nothing to the consumers in sense that they do not know what exactly the tariff or how many hours of supply the tariff they pay, and we get them. And then you have the issue about policy and regulatory certainty in the industry. So it's all a bunch of problems, and that's what's led to the situation where we find ourselves in.
Thank you, Wonodi. You were the founding managing director of NBET. So you were there right at the beginning of this transition period 5 years ago. What were the objectives? What are the hopes and aspirations? What was the outlook 5 years ago on how to bring power to the people?
Well, I think the very first thing is to increase supply and to homes and businesses. That's the ultimate aim of the reform. But there were other instruments that were being looked at, which is private capital and then private operatorship of the system. So those were the outlook that will have more investment coming and that there will be superior management and operation of the assets and eventually leading to higher service levels to consumers. That was the outlook. But in between those things, there were things that were expected to happen. We expected that people would pay the reflective tariff for the cost of production. We also expected that the discos would make the investment that are required to increase supply to the homes, and that the investment will be generally that also consumers will receive power and pay for what they've consumed.
That privatization program, looking back, do you think it was properly done? Do you think it was done in good faith? Do you think we crossed the T's and dot the I's? Do you think we had the right people in place to run the discos, the gencos? Do you think, looking back, how would you assess that program really?
Well, I think that the program went very well. There were some omissions, there were some commissions, there were people did things that maybe they did not quite realize to the extent how that would impair the program. So, for instance, is the issue of the acquisition of the distribution companies. We were at the Presidential Task Force on Power before I moved on to the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading PLC. And we had expected that the acquisition of the DISCO shares would all be by equity. But somewhere along the line, there was a little bit of compromise to allow the investors to borrow and then take the debt and then put them into the capital structure as equity. And, you know, debt is quite, it's not as patient as equity. And within 1 year, they started bubbling. And, you know, when further investment needed to be made, nobody was going to lend, and equity holders were not in a place to put additional capital into the distribution company. So that, in one essence, it's something that, you know, has affected the way the DISCOs have managed their affairs. But also, there are issues also around regulatory. I think to a large extent, these are things that could have been started out with regulation, firm and fair regulation along the way.
You just came back into the country from Lisbon, Portugal, where the 2019 Africa Energy Forum conference, this annual program, had taken place. You've attended this over the years, and sometimes we've shared thoughts on what the world is thinking about Nigeria when it comes to this. This is one global event where Nigeria always come into sharp focus when we're discussing energy about the African continent. So what's the current take of investors, global energy providers, and other players within the industry about Nigeria at this event just finished last week?
Sadly, the interest in Nigeria has ebbed seriously. I mean, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, even as far, 4 years ago, Nigeria would, when we have a country focus, would have a full house teeming with all manners of investors, people following what we're doing. But, you know, unfortunately, this time around, our hall was about 30% full. And if you had gone to Ghana, Ghana was teeming, people were sitting on the floor, Ethiopia was full. And, you know, it said something about Nigeria. The investment climate in Nigeria right now, it's not very favorable. And the things that people are looking at is the fact that our regulators have not, you know, they have not played fair with issues regarding tariff. And I say this because we know that tariffs for generation companies were adjusted, but the retail was held down. And then there are the issues of the solar projects that we entered into power purchase agreements with since 2016, and not one of them has reached a financial close. So to a large extent, people are watching Nigeria and feeling like, you know, we're really punching below our weight. And the truth of the matter is that, you know, it's also heartbreaking because, you know, the transactions that are closing in Ghana, closing in Cote d'Ivoire, closing in Mali, Senegal, we're all using the template document that we used for the Azura transaction. So to a large extent, people have copied from Nigeria and are moving ahead of us. And then we're just, you know, we're actually receding from where we were.
Yes, Wonodi, I know you must have felt like, those of you who are from Nigeria must have felt like fish out of water when you have these various country sessions. I know how it feels because at least the last I attended just about a year or two ago in Dubai, the hall was full. That was about 4 years ago. The hall was filled up. The panel was quite huge. I moderated that panel. Everyone was eager about Nigeria's electricity transition market and all of that. But it's very sad to hear that when it comes to Nigeria's session, electricity hall was just about 30% full. But then I'm sure you must have been hearing a few things from those 30% who are in attendance, non-Nigerians. What's their take about investing in this failing system? Investment is about the future. So are they still interested in coming in here? What do they want to see us do to get it right?
I think that the very first thing they want is regulatory certainty and predictability. You know, to a large extent, if you're making investment, you have to be sure that the climate, especially policy regulations, are stable over a period that these investments would will be recovered. We're talking about 20 years, 25 years for power purchase agreements and investment in distribution companies. So that's the first thing that is being talked about. But I guess there is another issue that is bubbling under that we try to raise, and it's the issue about investment in transmission and distribution companies, because there were over 2,000 delegates at the conference, and most of them come from either advisory firms or power development firms and OEMs and the EPC contractors. And everybody is focused on IPP. Ghana is going to face the same problem Nigeria faces now, which is where you have more generation than you can transmit or distribute. So the question is, if investments, private capital is going to come into distribution and transmission, how are we sure that the regulator who will decide a tariff will stay firm and make sure that if there is a need for tariff adjustment or what have you, that regulator will do what is necessary? So we started talking about a guarantee, a PRA, partial risk guarantee, for the regulator to make sure that when investments are made, not just in Nigeria, any African country, that the regulator will do what is necessary. Bosin, you might want to know that Ghana has also just concessioned its utility and is setting up a bulk trader, and they're facing issues about tariff, and everybody is also watching whether, after closing transactions on quite, slightly more expensive power, that they will be able to transfer the cost to consumers.
So in your take, this is the last question, Wonode, how do you think Buhari's administration should tackle this? The administration had carefully handled this in the last 4 years, but it looks like it has to be number one on President Buhari's agenda, with all that he spoke about on Democracy Day, about rural, urban industrialization and what have you. Even with the social investment program, folks still need to have electricity at home, whichever way you look at it. So whether you like it or not, you need it. So how do you think President Buhari should handle this transition market when the first 5 years finally lapses this year?
Well, I think when it comes to access to electricity, I must give kudos to the Rural Electrification Agency. They're pushing renewable energy, non-conventional renewable energy, and energy efficiency very well. So there will be some increase in access to electricity, not minding that some of the interventions might be anti the private sector, but they're doing some good work. So on that, the president might get some mileage. But on issue of power, and we keep saying this, there's a difference between power and electricity. Electricity, lights, bulbs, provide some little comfort, but power is for industrialization, and therefore we have to do something about the large power plants coming onto the grid. And one other thing that we are looking to see is that when it comes to the distribution companies or distribution space, we want to see some segmentation in the market in terms of having people who can afford to pay more and enjoy higher level of service to do that. So you begin to create electric tariff jurisdiction where you recognize that people in, say, Ikoyi or Maitama might have different needs from people in, say, Okokomaiko or what have you, and therefore they should pay differently from that. So we should look at segmentation, but most importantly, we have to make investments in increasing the capacity of the transmission system and the distribution system so that all the stranded capacity, we have over about 13 or 12 to 13,000 megawatts installed, that we can get them to homes and businesses. So if you would ask me, I would say the president needs to focus on getting investment into transmission and distribution as the very first thing to do.
Raymond Akawadori, thank you so much, former Managing Director of NBET and the current Managing Director of ZKJ Energy. Thank you so much for coming through. We appreciate your time today. We appreciate all.